Okay, just a few words about Mr. Rachel's on euthanasia. Yes, it's the same Rachel's as the first one. Um, okay, first thing I should note is that Rachel's is not going into the nuances of all six kinds of euthanasia. He's basically just taking on the broader issue of passive versus active euthanasia, killing versus letting die. So he's sort of taking that more broad approach. You'll really get into that when we get to Brock, and you'll see he's much more nuanced, and well, he has a lot more to say too. But anyways, Rachel's, the two things I want to point out: the AMA statement. Okay, you should note the AMA statement, which is the American Medical Association. That's the umbrella organization for doctors in the United States, and their position on euthanasia, which is outlined in Rachel's essay, and Rachel is trying to argue against that position. Okay. Now, I should note just quickly that although the American Medical Association comes out in opposition to active euthanasia and seems to be in favor of passive euthanasia, by the way, it's worth noting that when they poll doctors, that is, when they take opinion polls of doctors, they consistently are in favor of active euthanasia. Interesting, but that is the case. So the organization is not necessarily in line with doctors' opinions on this matter. Anyway, okay. Noting that, letting die just causes more pain. That's the typical argument for euthanasia. I would note the Downs syndrome baby example is a pretty weak and lame one, as has been pointed out by many people when they review this article by Rachel's. No one seems to be too impressed by that argument. It's not that good. A much better example is this thought experiment about Jones and Smith, where Jones goes into the bathroom, and when the baby's taking a bath and wants to inherit money, plans to kill him, and the baby slips and falls and he lets the baby drown, versus Smith. I might be getting these two people mixed up, but anyway, Smith does the same thing, but instead of letting the baby drown, he actually drowns the baby. And there doesn't seem to be any moral difference between the two actions, even though one is killing and one is letting die. And that's kind of the argument here, that there isn't a very strong moral distinction between killing and letting die. This is a very interesting topic. The more thought you give it, the more you'll see how this is actually, it is not that obvious whether killing is worse than letting die, even though intuitively you want to say killing is worse than letting die. That seems obvious at first until you start thinking about things. Maybe I'll give a couple of other examples. Okay, so you're driving down the road and a kid darts out from behind a car and you hit the kid, and he's lying there on the pavement, and you call the ambulance and you're like freaking out, but the kid dies. Hey, you killed the kid. All right, you killed the kid. There's no question about it. I mean, you didn't intend to, of course. It was an accident, but you did kill the kid. Now think about this example. You're standing on the sidewalk and you see someone driving down the street, and the kid darts out and gets hit, and the driver takes off and doesn't even do anything, which, okay, he's a jerk. But you see this, and so the kid's lying there bleeding to death, and you just walk away and don't do anything about it. This happens a lot, by the way. People do this. I don't want to get involved, whatever. they just let the, so you're letting the kid die. You didn't have any part in the incident. You didn't kill the kid, but you're obvious that kid could have lived. You could have called an ambulance and saved the kid's life. You could have gone out and tried to do first aid or something, and you did nothing. You just walk away. Think about it. Which one's worse? In the first instance, there was no intention of doing any harm. It's very sad, but morally speaking, you know, it's terrible, but it's not, he didn't really do anything terrible. He didn't really do anything wrong because it wasn't on purpose. In the second instance, you did do something wrong because you could have saved the kid's life maybe, and you didn't do anything to help. And that is morally reprehensible in a, you know, much more morally reprehensible, I think. I mean, I think most people would say so. So I'm just giving this one example to point out that the instances I just made up here, killing is worse, killing is not worse. Killing is not worse than letting die. Letting die was worse because you could have done something to help the kid. In the second case, in the first case, you did. It turns out that when you review cases of killing and letting die, motives and intentions seem to play a big role here. Like, did you really intentionally mean to kill somebody? Did you intentionally let someone die? It's not the mere act of killing and letting die that makes the moral difference, is what I'm trying to say. And in the example I just gave, letting die seemed much worse than killing. And this is kind of what Rachel's is getting at here, because people, he's trying to he's trying to say this distinction is not as clear as people, you know, people's intuitions make it out to be. Like, everybody wants to say, obviously killing's worse than letting die. No, right? Jones and Smith are equally morally bad people, even though one killed and one let die. They're both equally, you know, bastards or whatever. It is not about, because they had the same motives and the same result. And you know, does it really matter whether that one killed and one let die? Not really. I mean, not in that case, not in the case I cited either. So it's interesting to just keep that in mind. You know, you should think about this notion of killing versus letting die. Which one is actually worse? It is not nearly as obvious as it seems at first. You know, think of some examples and things. He says, notice that letting someone die is an action that can be praised or blamed. By the way, if you go to the doctor and the doctor lets you die instead of treating you, he is definitely blamed for doing that. Rachel mentions this. I mean, if you don't have, you know, if you don't have a terminal illness and you just have something wrong with you, that you have an appendicitis and your appendix bursts and you die, the doctor blamed for that. I mean, you're going to get malpractice suit for that. He can't claim that he just let you die as an excuse. He didn't kill you. He let you die. That's not going to fly. And so he says, if the decision has already been made to let someone die, that it doesn't seem like killing's any worse in that kind of case. And that does go to the terminal illness, you know, end of life situation. I mean, if you've already decided the person's going to die, why would killing be worse than letting die? It doesn't seem like it's going to make a moral difference. And therefore, he thinks the AMA statement should be looked at again. And okay, that was probably actually too much. I'm not going to go over all the details of every one of the essays in this section or the next. I'd prefer you to read them carefully and discuss them, and not just lecture at you the whole time. All right. So that's Rachel's.